Welcome to Murder Most Foul, a podcast devoted to exploring famous murder cases of our time. Some solved, some unsolved, but all fascinating and guaranteed to raise the hairs on the back of your neck. I'm your host, Jim Solanowski. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Murder Most Foul. This is my first episode with a guest from Down Under. I do have listeners down under in Australia and New Zealand, but this is my first interview, so I'm very excited. My guest today is Duncan McNabb, who is going to discuss a very interesting case, and it is also, obviously, the subject of a book, Recipe for Murder, which is available out there on Amazon in the States, Barnes & Noble, or your local bookstore. And so welcome, Duncan.
Jim, thank you very much for having me, and good morning to everybody. Well, good morning from here anyway.
There you are. In Australia, it is morning. It is about 5 o'clock here in the States. So before we go dive into the case, which is a fascinating case, and it has gotten a lot of local American coverage in documentaries in 2020s, whether that's the programs here and Dateline and stuff like that. It's fairly new, or at least it wrapped up fairly recently. It's not an old case. So it's still out there in the interest. So I'm glad I was able to get Duncan. So we want to start with a little bio of Duncan. So, I know that you were a you were a detective and you were with the police force, but you've also then done some journalistic work. And of course, this book, and we'll see, we'll get by the end if there's any other books you've written or stories that you're working on right now. So Tell my audience a little bit about Duncan.
I started my life, professional life, back in the dark ages. I come from Sydney in Australia. Back in the dark ages, I was a detective in the New South Wales Police Force, which is the state police. That lasted about 9 years. And at some point, I realised that some of my colleagues were gloriously corrupt. Not only my colleagues, but also lawyers, judges, yada, yada. Sydney was an incredible place. There is, in my humble view, as someone who's ratted around the world a lot, in those rock and roll days of the 80s, Sydney was, and particularly King's Cross, where I live, which is the red light district, well, former red light district, now is a bit sort of beige. Nowhere else like it in the world. 5 square kilometres are the most incredible things. Drug dealers, bent coppers, booze sold illegally, blah, 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 drugs galore, strippers, nightclubs, the judiciary, great restaurants, everything crammed in this little hothouse. Great place to learn how to be a copper. I eventually gave that up after an incident with a detective who I wrote about 2 books later, a guy called Roger Rogerson. He was a sort of a seminal reason for my departure. Went into criminal defence stuff, did some very high-profile stuff there, and eventually moved across into the reputable world of the media, which is pretty much not very different, actually, from what I was doing, poking my nose into other people's business, and instead writing about it or making TV, which I've been doing now for so bloody long, I can barely think however long it has been. But this book, Recipe for Murder, is number 13. Well, actually, number 13 published. There are actually 2 others loitering around. One's a sort of an as told to thing for a chap, and the other's a book on the cartels currently languishing in a publisher in the US who went broke. So welcome to writing for a living.
So the case that we're talking about is the subject of the book Recipe for Murder, I just found fascinating, by the way. And I say this to all my listeners, got to get the book, because we're going to do this about 45 minutes. We're going to cover as much as we can about the story, but the book is very rich. The book is very detailed without getting into the weeds, and you're able to, I know it's corny, a page turner. So you do move to the next thing and you say, what, really? But it is very clear by the end. You really understand what happened. Well, to a degree. And I'll, put this in as we go on. The perpetrator, the protagonist, antagonist, whatever you want to call, the murderer is very screwed up. I mean, just it keeps coming back. Every page I turn, I say no. Now, again, I grew up with Law and Order, and Perry Mason goes back even farther than that. And I know you got to keep saying you don't have to have a motive. You don't have to have a motive to prove a crime. But every jury, everybody wants to know why. If it's jealousy, if it's money, if it's a guy raped my daughter, I'm going out and killing him. There's usually a why, and maybe you have a theory that I missed as I read the book as to why. But we'll get there. I'm teasing my audience that this case, she never pled insanity, but it is bizarre. This case. So I'm going to let you sort of take off a bit. Like I said, I have a list of questions if I feel we haven't hit a topic, or a thing that I question.
Yep.
But we can go ahead.
You made the point too about mental health, and I think that's something that's in the background of this entire case, because people like you and I and your listeners are sensible, average people, and we look at murder as something absolutely abhorrent. And I've got a mate of mine who I do a lot of work with in Australia. He's our leading criminal psychologist, Tim Watson-Munro, and Tim's been around longer than I have. And Tim always says to me, he said, reiterated in this case from day one, and I mentioned him in the book, Tim has always said you need to get completely at the front of your mind. Erin Patterson and people like Erin Patterson are not mad. They're just bad. They're wired differently. That part I added myself. And that's the thing with Erin. She's not mad. There was no evidence led of any psychological problems whatsoever. The only mention of mental health issues in this entire case, and it ran for 10 weeks in court, was her husband mentioned that she had, or estranged husband, said that she had battled some mental health issues over the years. That was the only reference. So she's gone to trial with her lawyers confident that she is capable of instructing them, that she knows the difference between right and wrong, all that sort of stuff, and she's capable of conducting her own defense instructions. So she's not mad, but she is certainly bad, and that never comes up. It didn't even come up in mitigation when they were discussing her sentence either. No mention of it whatsoever. It was not the elephant in the room, but it was a fairly large object walking around outside, and we are still none the wiser. As far as I can see, Erin Patterson is just completely and utterly not suffering from any impeding mental illness that impacted her judgments. She knew what she was doing, and she did it. And this gets back to your question of motive. I think there's a confluence of things, but ultimately she's just one of those rare, fortunately, people who find that killing somebody isn't really a huge problem for them. It's just like, I'll do it this way. And they're just in my way. And I've met a couple of these people over the years, and we talk to them, and they can be pleasant, bit of fun, sensible, quite charming on occasions. But if there is an impediment or a problem they want to deal with, rather than you and I do something simple, have an argument, disagreement, these people think, well, bugger it, I'll just kill them. And that decision is made quite straightforward. And that's the bizarre thing about Erin. We knew that she and her husband had been estranged since 2015, her husband, Simon. There had been, we'll get to those later, these incidents involving her husband and what she was cooking for him. And then they get to 2022, into 2022, and she finally finds out that he's told the taxation people that he is now single rather than part of a family unit. She's, I think, very obsessive. I think this is the person who would be, you wouldn't do jigsaw puzzles with her. She'd be very precise about everything. And that's given her the shits. She's got upset with his family, her in-laws, because they haven't been supportive of her case. So they're rather supportive of him, or trying to walk that tricky road between two parties. So they haven't been fully supportive. And that really has set her off. But that's after what may have been the attempts on his life. So she's got this long-running problem with him. And I think she's just decided to get rid of these pesky people. And it's as bland as that. And it's a curiosity in this case, too, that I think she's been playing this for a number of years. And it's just a convenient way of ridding her of a problem. I don't think she ever intended for a witness to be alive to give evidence against her. I think she was planning on a total wipeout. And the thing that no one can come to grips with, and I'm very much in that category, is that on the day before the lunch, now the lunch was in Saturday, the 29th of July, 2023. The day before the lunch, her husband, Simon, has said, thanks, no, but I can't make it. I feel uncomfortable about coming to lunch. So if he was the main protagonist, what was a potentially domestic motivated murder, then the main protagonist has been removed. So the next day, 4 innocents arrive, her 2 in-laws and Gail Patterson, who's her mother-in-law, Gail's sister Heather, and her husband Ian Wilkinson, who is the local Baptist pastor. Just a table full of innocents. And yet she still prepares the beef Wellington that morning. She whacks the death cap mushrooms on. She knows her husband isn't coming, and she sits them down and feeds this deadly meal to them. And I wish there was an easy way to work that out, but there isn't.
Well, yeah, you set that up very well. That these were his people. In other words, it was his side of the family. As you said, she was not enamored of. But we keep saying, how can you take it that next level? I could be really pissed at someone, and I may go scratch their car or puncture their tires. But killing, okay. And again, the one of the main antagonists, or someone she was after, of course, was her husband. And we will point out as we go along, this is what was fascinating for me. A lot of things. Australia, also the way that the judicial system, not that different, but that there was this separate. I mean, they charged her with those crimes, the dinner, the lunch, but then they also, because this stuff came out, and obviously, it's. You look at some past history of her, and the poor husband was at least 4 times seriously poisoned, if we now assume it was poison. Okay, he's not unlucky to get 4 food poisonings from eating bad clams. Okay, the luck of that's not going to happen. So then you can and so she was charged with the attempted murders, because not everyone died at the lunch. So that was an attempted murder. Then the ones who became deceased, that was murder. And then they charged her with the 4 attempted murders years earlier, with the husband. That was unbelievable in a concept. And of course, the judge decided, and I'm sure it would have happened in America, these are too far distant. You can charge, but we can't put it in the same trial. So there's going to be 2 trials. And then ultimately I think the prosecutor said, well, we don't need this. It's too complicated to prove. It's long gone. We don't have any evidence from the hospital. We don't have so let's stick with this.
Yeah, you're spot on the money. When it was the case has, as of 29th of July, in November, she was finally charged. Now, the police, some people have said, why did they take so long? Well, a quick explanation on this. Good coppers don't race to a decision. They let the evidence take them. It's the old jigsaw puzzle routine. You've got 1,000 pieces on your dining room table, and you're putting them bit by bit. And that's how good coppers work. If you start with thinking, she did it, you're going to stuff it up, because you need the evidence to get there. You get my favourite bugbear, confirmation bias. Don't do the investigation to confirm what you think. Let the evidence take you to it. Yeah. Even though I can't put myself in the detective's head, but if you've been walking around Erin Patterson's case and you've got 4 people at the one lunch who are in dire straits in hospital, 3 would subsequently die, and the 5th person, the cook, at home, not unwell at all, she she feigned illness, but as one of the doctors who treated her said, she was underlying normal. Um, and then the cops go bit by bit through this painstaking investigation. They get all the forensic stuff, online life. Key problem for anyone contemplating a crime, not that I'm suggesting it, is if you're going to do your searches, you've just given the coppers a massive kick ahead. So if you're planning crimes, don't do it online. So they've done all this sort of stuff. As a copper, you meet these remarkable people. All of a sudden, a detective who's sitting down having a coffee one morning is talking to a mycologist, a mushroom expert, a fungi fancier over here somewhere else. And you're meeting all these disparate people. And all of a sudden, your life is full of people you'd never dream of meeting. But all their evidence comes into play on the jigsaw puzzle. So by the 2nd of November in Australia, it's called reasonable cause to suspect. And that's when you can go and arrest them. So on the 2nd of November, the cops had this whirlwind trip around the life of Erin Patterson, and they arrested her at her home in Leongatha in 140 odd kilometres. What's that? Just on 100 miles from Melbourne. Nice rural part of the world. They arrested her and they charged her with 3 accounts of murder from the lunch, 1 account of attempted murder because Ian Wilkinson survived. Put that one down to good fortune for Ian, a glimmer of good fortune in what happened to the poor man. And they also charged her with 3 counts of attempting to murder her husband, Simon, on prior occasions. And that's what you were talking about. And it's this oddity of them. 3 counts were for, and as estranged couples, Simon always thought they were trying to reconcile. He was always hoping they've got 2 kids together, blah, 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 trying to do the right thing. And Erin would keep suggesting they go away for little weekends. The 2 of them, they loved camping. They loved the outback. Well, not the outback. They loved the bush in Australia. So they go away camping. Erin would cater. And on each of these 3 occasions over about roughly 18 months, the first one, I'll just go through it quickly. The first one, they're planning on going away for the first trip. And it's really exciting and nervous and all that sort of jazz, the 2 of them together. Erin pops around to Simon's the night before to sort of sort out the camping gear and all that sort of stuff. She brings with him some penne pasta with a bolognese sauce. Simon has that after she's gone home. Next morning, he is feeling decidedly unwell, but he thinks, just a bit of, some bug, I'll press on. They press on and he gets worse and worse and worse and ends up in hospital. He recovers from that. Takes him a while, but he gets over it. There is no suggestion there's no evidence whatsoever that Erin tried to poison him. And they've got no forensics, no nothing. And the doctors are thinking, it's a bad case of food poisoning, poor bugger. The next time they go away, Erin again does the catering, and Erin likes making curries. And she's knocked herself up a korma. And she's got various spicing levels because Simon likes it a bit hotter and she's sort of not so hot and the kids don't like it hot at all. So she's got very thoughtful. They go away together and he has the curry and the next morning he is crook, really crook. And he gets worse and worse and worse. And as it progresses, they eventually get back to home and Simon's put in an ambulance and carted off to the local hospital. And they think, oh, my goodness, this better go to Melbourne to the big hospital. And the poor bugger is in hospital for quite some time. He is in dire straits. The doctors say you need life. It's literally life or death. You need surgery. We'll go to your next of kin to get consent. Next of kin is Erin. Simon, massive surgery, bits and pieces removed. Terrible stuff. He goes into rehab. That's all cool. He's getting better. Erin, solicitous as ever, says, I'll come back to my new house in Leongatha where the lunch happened, and I'll look after you till you're back on your feet and can go home. And he's thinking, this is good. He's got the kids nearby, reconciliation, maybe in the air. And he's getting better and better and better until one day she makes him a special stew. Now, this is where it gets bizarre. She's got, and this is a side we'll probably get to later, she's got Facebook friends, lots of Facebook friends from a crime group. And they've developed good online friendships, pandemics in, all that sort of stuff. So it becomes a social hub. And she goes back to her Facebook friends and says, my recipe for beef goulash, my mother's recipe, I just can't replicate it. Can anyone help me? So a very nice woman in the book called Danny Barclay, who I chat about on occasions, Danny's got her recipe for beef goulash. It's a pretty good one, and she's very proud of it. So Danny sends off the recipe for this special stew for Simon. And then Erin posts pictures of it, and Danny is horrified because her beef goulash is covered in mushrooms. And lo and behold, Simon gets sick shortly thereafterwards. So that's a sort of lead up to it. The problem with bringing this in, it's great to charge her with those crimes, but there is no forensic evidence. There is no medical evidence. There is nothing to support it aside from chronology. And the chronology is based on what happened after rather than before. So I thought this is the coppers and the prosecutors doing what they usually do, and it's not a bad thing. Let's give her the lot so we know everyone knows where we stand, and we might have to trim it as we go down. Well, it got trimmed. Eventually, the judge in the preliminaries decided to split the trials. We'll have the lunch trial and the lead-up trial, and the lead-up trial would happen after the lunch trial. Fair enough. And literally, we're in court 29th of April this year, and the judge then says, oh, by the way, the charges for the Simon charges, the precursor charges, have been removed. So we go to trial purely with the lunch charges, literally the three murders and the one attempted murder, and the other charges forget about. And I think that was prudent. I mean, if as you mentioned earlier, if you're sitting in the jury box and you've got these 7 charges or 8 charges, whatever is lined up, you're thinking, enough time to go. Let's listen to the evidence, go outside, have a cup of tea and a biscuit, and come back in and say, congratulations, guilty. So in the interest of fairness, it was, I think, an extraordinarily prudent decision to split the trials and to get rid of it. And that's a sort of weird lead up to this case. I mean, who'd have thought it? Simon, the evidence says that Simon became suspicious, or his suspicions gelled in around September 2022 before the taxation affair, that maybe Erin was trying to do something to him. Spot on the money.
Now, a great setup to and covering many of my questions here. I think what we have to we've sort of nibbled around the edges of fungi, so we need to start talking about fungi because, of course, which is, as the investigation goes forward, we are there's little doubt that it's death cap mushrooms. So why don't you give my audience a little primer on death cap mushrooms?
I don't think they're common in the United States, but they're originally a European mushroom. And they came to Australia and to other places in the world where they've been found, usually in the roots of trees, and they grow in the roots of usually in oak trees. They're very pretty, by the way, and they can easily be mistaken for other mushrooms if you go foraging. The trick with them is that they are absolutely deadly. They look quite nice. In Australia, they can only be found in South Australia, certain parts of it, in Victoria, particularly in the Gippsland district where this happened, and in Canberra, our national capital, which, usual joke, there are a lot of poisonous mushrooms. They're just one of many in Canberra, in the national capital. They've had a terrible history. They've been used as a method of poisoning for literally back to the times of Roman times, Greek times. They've murdered, I think a number of notable people have been bumped off using them years and years ago. More recently around the world, there are cases where people have just simply foraged for them. In the UK and in Australia, they wandered outside. They look nice. We'll have those and we'll throw them into dinner. I know what I'm doing. I'm a mushroom forager. Some of the mushroom foraging cases I've read about, they've actually harvested them and decided to check on whether they were, just to make sure, they fry them in butter and eaten them. Not the cleverest of way to check if it's deadly, but there you go. So they're not uncommon and they spring up everywhere. Where Erin Patterson may have been inspired, and that evidence was never completely and utterly 100% as compelling, is that there is a website that we can all go to called iNaturalist. And it's a website where you can, if you're a fungi fancier, for example, you can find your fungi, photograph the fungi in question, and then pop it up on the website saying, hey, can anyone confirm what this is? And that's in part where this gets intriguing, because we know that Erin Patterson did have a look at the iNaturalist website a little while, well before the murders. And we know that some months after the confirmed date, the two very nice people, one a former poisons expert, but not a mushroom expert, had been in a little village near Korumburra and Leongatha, the two twin towns. The victims were from Korumburra, a small town. Erin was, and the lunch was in Leongatha, so 12 k's apart. But in a little village in the middle of nowhere, one of those cutesy little villages that you guys have got in New England, we've got everywhere. Everything's pretty and it's got little secondhand furniture shops and little bookshops and a little bakery and incredibly expensive bad coffee. She's gone through that village, and we know she was there because her mobile phone has pinged adjacent to it. But we know in a paddock in a reserve near the centre of that little tiny village called Lock and another one called Outram, that there have been eye natural sightings of death cap mushrooms. And these are really accurate. Not only do you take the photograph of it, GPS on the phone also logs it onto the website so you know exactly where it is. It's like the X marks the spot. So we know they were growing in Erin's vicinity at the time. And there's just citizen scientists, they like to call themselves, spotted and saying, hey guys, can you confirm this looks like a death cap? Is it? One of the fungi fancier, she gave great evidence. She was just a moment of lightness in a court case because she was so passionate about mushrooms. She'd found the mushrooms, I think, April 2023 at this little town. She'd actually had her dog poo bag, so she'd picked the mushrooms because she knows how dangerous they are and disposed of them. Because it was a place where, kids from the local school might play, or someone might just innocently pick them up and that'll curtains for them. So that's inferentially where Erin got them from, but they're very common. The saddest moment for me in the court case, and I think it just knocked everyone flat, was the professor, the emergency care physician from Monash Hospital, where all four were, who just went through their original presentation of the hospital and the slow mechanics of how these poor souls died. Ian Wilkinson survived, but just what they went through. And bottom line, this death cap mushrooms, there is no cure. Good fortune and there are some treatments that may save your life, but that's not the congratulations, you have the magic pill, no such thing. First, they have to diagnose them, which as the judge mentioned, if Erin Patterson had come forward day one and said, hey, these are death caps, it might have been a different outcome. We don't know, but it might have been. So they first find out it's death caps and they treat them as best they can. At one stage, the two women, Gail and Heather, were so ill doctors just had to, it's a waiting game. Don Patterson, Simon's father, he was the strongest one of the three, and they decided to try a liver transplant, which is the dramatic but the best option. That didn't work. The transplant was a success, but the poor soul died. Ian Wilkinson, the pastor, soldiered on and he survived. But the treatments are just basically hope. The best quality medical care, there's only a point to which you can help. And this professor's evidence was so profoundly sad. And at the very end of the evidence, Erin's barrister, Colin Mandy, popped up and said, I just think we need a few minutes. And everyone in the courtroom went, oh. It was just so incredibly sad. But it was that slow process of death from the lunch through to over the ensuing 4 or 5 days, that these poor souls just literally died. Massive organ failure, a horrible, horrible death. And that's the thing that always gets me, that Erin Patterson knew that mouthful by mouthful she was feeding people something so diabolical. And I just can't come to grips with that.
Well, and again, as you say, we can imagine, if we want, we can imagine that dinner, like you say. She knows that she's made this meal, and it does come out in the trial, whether it's happenstance. She has a different color plate.
Yes.
So she's got a different color plate. So they're sitting down and they're eating, and as you say, she's eating, and she probably made hers plain, or maybe just a little bit, if she wanted to try to, but she probably faked her whole thing. She didn't. I wouldn't have trusted that a little bit will kill me, or won't kill me. But she's watching them eat.
Yeah,
and things into and knowing that they weren't going to drop dead like cyanide or something like that. They were going to get up, go away sometime in the middle of the night or tomorrow or whatever. And so she's in bed at night going, gee, I wonder, how many are going to.
It's terrifying. And this curiosity were never clarified because the only witness is Erin. She served them. The point about the plates is because we had preliminary hearings we couldn't report, which is where you hear Simon's story, which I've never heard that before. I think, wow, I can't say a word. Ian Wilkinson gave evidence early on. I was surprised to see him at a preliminary hearing, but he came into court. This is August 24. Obviously still quite unwell, but a very impressive human being. And he was the one that first told, and we're in the media gallery leaning forward, wondering what the heck happened. And then he talks about the plates, the 4 matching plates and the ring-in. And that was the first time we heard about how it happened. What we could never confirm was that Erin and Erin wrote her own story for this. And one part of her own story is that they'd bought a cake to lunch for dessert, the family had, and that she had a long history, she said, of eating illnesses, or eating disorders, I'm sorry, and that she'd eaten most of the cake and then thrown up. Now, my nasty mind, and it is a fairly nasty mind, suggests that if she had eaten a little bit of death cap mushroom, throwing up afterwards might have been a fast way of just saying, that's how it happened. I'm building myself a story. Can't confirm that, but I'm thinking there is a little bit of not an alibi, but a little bit of a reason as to why I'm not as sick as the rest of them. We don't know. What we do know that afternoon is that she headed off to the local garbage dump shortly afterwards, which the court could never hear either. And she got rid of a 120-litre garbage bag. Now, we don't know what was in the garbage bag, but the timing is interesting, to put it mildly. That was her first trip. And of course, I think we'll chat about later, she had a second trip to the garbage dump as well. So yeah, I think she'd set herself up to be a victim so it'd look okay, but it didn't work. Like a lot of criminals, they plan meticulously their crime, but they don't plan the exit, and they don't plan what happens if something goes wrong. And I don't think Erin anticipated that the coppers in Victoria would look at it and think, I don't think she got that. And she didn't expect anyone to survive lunch. That's the key point for me. She had no idea. Everyone was going to die that day, and they didn't. So by September, she had a witness.
There was, again, the trial, as I mentioned to my audience, they got to get the book because the trial, the details in the trial are great, and the various witnesses and what they testified to. And of course, she testified in her own behalf. But in America, and I'm sure in Australia, lawyers say, no, don't do that. You're not going to make it better for yourself.
Yeah, it's curious, and that was always traditionally as well. You're thinking, well, if you put your client up in the witness box to give evidence, chances are you will. You're pretty stuffed. Defense attorney mates of mine are telling me now the jurors, they believe that jurors are getting more interested to actually hear the story from the person. It's not quite these sort of, because literally up until the prosecution case closed, we're thinking, what the hell is a defense case? And her defense counsel had been hinting, but not saying anything. So we're all on leaning forward thinking, what's a defense case going to be? Well, very simply, I call my client Erin Patterson. We thought, wow. But it turns out that it wasn't unexpected. I thought it was a bit unlikely. But I think a couple of things in my mind anyway. Erin Patterson has an ego the size of a block of home units, a massive ego. And I wasn't surprised that she wanted her day in court. And there's this perverse thought, and I think I've written about it, is that was Erin Patterson the true crime aficionado, the person who spent her entire day listening to podcasts when she was pushing the vacuum cleaner around, getting the kids ready for school, stay-at-home mum, as she always said. The music in her ear every day was a true crime podcast. She had 400 or so books on true crime. She watched true crime television. She was also, I'm told, obsessed by reality programs of people in prison. She's going to find out the easy way now.
Wait. Now, you have a little tone in your voice. Now, let's not put that down without that intensity.
We love our audience.
You have nothing, and I have nothing. All right, let's just be straight about that.
Well, I'm curious because I know this is just utterly self-serving on my part. I would think that I rather crow. Did she have anything I've written? And a couple of years ago, I did the first series in Australia called Australia Behind Bars, which is our prisons, unlike the US where prison authorities are actually very helpful. Australian prison authorities have always said, we don't want the media in here. And it took us 3 years of negotiation to actually get behind bars in Australia. You guys do it all the time. I mean, I remember I went to interview a chap in Massachusetts, just outside Boston, in a maximum security protection prison. And it was, you contact that prison. Yeah, come on down. If he's happy to chat, yeah, not a problem. You wander in. Oh, you're the bloke from Australia. Chat, cup of coffee, wander in. Fabulous.
I'm sorry, what was the case?
It was a case of a UK guy who had been convicted of murdering his wife and child in Boston, Neil Entwistle. And
what was the name of the murderer?
Entwistle, Neil Entwistle, a UK guy who murdered his wife and child and was convicted of it. It's a very sad but really weird case. And I went down to interview him just to have a chat to him. And the reception in prison was wonderful. And I've also been to, I think one of the most disturbing places I've ever been to was interviewing a fraudster in the federal penitentiary at Atlanta, which if you wanted to look at pictures of the scary prison, US federal prison Atlanta does it nicely. But at the same time, well received. Come in, sit down, cup of coffee, chat, blah, blah, blah. Australian prisons, no, you can't get in. So we got into this prison for the first time, and just running through my mind, just thinking, has she been watching one of my programs? I think it just runs through your mind. Have I got someone like Erin Patterson in the fan list? And that's hence the slightly raised eyebrows occasionally. It's and so the Facebook groups that surround true crime are fascinating, and Erin was one of them. That's how she got that. Her true crime interest was sparked by a Facebook group about a famous case here, and that's where she met all these women she was chatting to online.
Now, it does say in your book that in the trial they were witnesses, or there were I mean, were they local Facebookers, or did people come in from other countries? How did they, or did Zoom? How did they testify?
Oh, the Facebook, the
Facebook people.
Yeah, the Facebook witnesses, they came in the first hearing, the preliminary hearing that we weren't allowed to report. They were actually in court, or sorry, yeah, two of them were in court, and one of them was on a Zoom call, which is quite common these days.
Yeah.
And at the trial itself, they came in on video link for a couple of reasons. One of the primary reasons is because the trial was actually held in an area not far from where the murders happened. So rather than in a big courtroom in Melbourne, the principal city in Victoria, which is set up for all this sort of stuff, we were in a country courthouse. So just imagine, if you will, 40 or 50 odd media people from around the world in a little country courthouse, and the number of court watchers. I mean, normally you've got half a dozen turn up day one and they sort of dissipate. As Erin Patterson went along, the court watching crew grew. So the courtroom was filled to capacity every day, and there was a queue to get in. It's almost like you could sell tickets to it. So that was, and the Facebookers came in that way. And it's an interesting, Erin's online life, I suppose, which is where I'm heading towards this. She had the face that everyone saw, the doting mother, stay-at-home mum, looking after her kids. Her only family that she would admit to was her husband's family. She has a sister we know who she is, but she's never been anywhere near this. She was, I think, very prudently kept away. It's as though she'd been sliced off. Erin referred to Simon's parents and extended family as her family. But online, there's a very different Erin. She was saying quite rude things about them. She was quite voluble online about what she thought about some of the townspeople, what she thought about her in-laws on occasions, what she thought about her husband. I think she described him as a deadbeat. So she's got quite an intimate friendship online with these people that she would never, ever meet. And that's the interesting thing about it. There was no genuine prospect of sitting down having a chat. It was always online discussions. And they met in a Facebook group, and this might give you an idea of where it comes from, at a Facebook group called Keep Kelly Lane Behind Bars. Now, Kelly Lane was a very famous case in Australia. She gave birth to a small child. She has a very interesting background for anyone wanting to dig around it. She gave birth and her child disappeared the day after she left hospital, never seen again. She was eventually arrested and convicted of murdering the child, even though the body has never been found, the poor little kid Tegan. And it was quite a cause celebre in Australia. And then a documentary came up, and the documentary was, in my view, extremely wayward, to put it mildly. All of a sudden, the Facebook group pops up, Keep Kelly Lane Behind Bars, and all these people join it. And they have online discussions about the case, and they form friendships, and they have little side groups and all that sort of stuff. And then the pandemic hits, and Victoria, where all this happened, was the most locked down part of the world ever. I think 200 odd days or something or other. So their social interactions are all online. And that's where she developed these strong friendships. And there's a certain intimacy to the friendships. And they thought Erin she could be acerbic. They knew she was incredibly bright, which she was. And she could be fun, and she was a great researcher. So they developed these close friendships, day-to-day stuff. And that's how I feel sorry for the poor witnesses. They think they've got a good mate in Erin, and then they're watching TV and they say, that house looks familiar where this horrible incident has happened. Jesus, we haven't heard from Erin in a couple of days. just a curiosity, the poisoning happens on Saturday. The news is sort of kicking into gear about Monday, Tuesday. And a couple of the Facebook group members are looking at the news reports and they're looking at the house and saying, geez, that looks like the place Erin showed us. And then she comes back online a few days later and starts talking to them, doesn't mention the lunch at all. But she comes back with a new online handle, whatever you call it, as croissant, I think it was. It's just weird. And that's where they fast realize that their friendship with Erin might be coming to an end.
Now, you mentioned that she was the major. I mean, obviously the defense cross-examined the prosecution witnesses, but that was the only real defense part of the defense case was her. What did she say? I mean, in other words, just deny?
Yeah, she did. Casting my mind back to the very first days, Erin had always set up this, it's just a terrible accident. I'm devastated. And that's if people go hunting around online will see this. She only gave one interview. She was door stopped outside the house, and she turned around and gave the interview. And she's standing outside her bright red car, and she says, "I'm devastated." And she gets the names of one of the victims wrong, which is interesting. But she's always saying it's just a terrible accident, and that continues throughout the entire trial. So when we get to trial, we've got two choices. But her defense has always been, it was just a terrible, tragic accident. So she hops in the witness box and we're all sort of thinking, wow, this is going to be interesting. And she's there for quite a number of days. I've given evidence a lot. I've got to tell you, the witness box I can't think of anywhere lonelier in the world. Everyone's looking at you. And there's a couple of people in the room who are going to try and really stuff you up. She gave her evidence and she just unpicked all the lies she told. She had a lot of lies to explain. Day one, when the cops first interviewed her, she tells some terrible lies. They ask her about the dehydrator used for the mushrooms, and she says, I've never had one. And they know when she says that they've actually got her on CCTV dumping it. So she's got to, she walked, old copper's trick, walk to the edge of the cliff, and if you'd like a hand to walk over it, we'll give you one. So she set up this tissue of lies in her interview. So she's got to unpick them. So in the witness box, she's unpicking the lies. Oh, yeah, I was, usual routine. It's not a bad excuse. I was so horrified by what had happened. I just wasn't thinking straight. Well, she wasn't thinking straight for quite some time by the look of it. So she's got to explain the dehydrator that she didn't have, that she did have. Have you seen this? She's got to explain her lack of illness, and she's not doing very successfully. And just a curiosity, I just mentioned in passing, a lot of listeners would probably talk about this. I have a lot of my female friends particularly rang me and said, you've got to mention the white pants, because Erin was wearing white pants the days after she was seen on CCTV. And as they were all saying, typical bloke, you wouldn't notice. But if you've got some sort of terrible diarrhea issues, you're not going to wear white trousers. And I thought, God, that's a good point. Anyway, so she's got to explain that. She then has to explain that I didn't forage for mushrooms. Well, actually, I did. So she has to unpick all her lies. And look, as a witness, she was very competent. She's very bright, a bit argumentative on occasions, but, sometimes lawyers throw curveballs at you, and she was on top of those as well. But she gave very capable evidence. It's just that it wasn't credible. And she was there for quite some time, but she had to unpick this whole tissue of lies. And at the same time, then explain some weird things like my background, why I would tell these lies. Why I've had eating disorders, I've had this, that, and the other. And then there was this bizarre thing. Well, I thought I'd say that I'd had a cancer diagnosis to get them to the table. And then she had to, this is really problematic for her, she had to admit that she hadn't got a cancer diagnosis. And then her other problems was, well, maybe I was going in for a liposuction. So the coppers had actually gone to the clinic she was allegedly going to, and they don't do it. So she's going, I was also embarrassed that I was going to get a gastric bypass. The clinic she was going to didn't do gastric bypasses either. So lie after lie after lie, she's trying to talk her way through, and it just didn't work. So by the time she'd given her evidence, which her story to her lawyer was interesting, and thinking, she's good at this. And cross-examination was fairly fast and hard. But at the same time, it's just made her, she wasn't a credible witness. She was a good witness, but it was all bullshit.
So I say this to people, it'd be great if you go back and take the other road. But we can't. But what do you think if she didn't testify? Do you think there was reasonable doubt that maybe the jury could think it was an accident? In other words, there was no direct, she didn't buy the
Yeah.
point, someone doesn't have proof of her holding the mushrooms and putting them in there's not an eyewitness to that. Do you think that there might have been a little bit more wondering about it, or was it pretty done before she testified?
I think it was pretty done before she testified. I think she was in a fairly diabolical position, and the only way out was for her to put a face to the story. Old storytelling trick: put a face to the story and tell me your story. And you think, oh yeah, maybe there's some credit in that. But in Erin's case, there was just the weight of circumstances against her was massive, and even though she was a very competent witness, very compelling, but she was just not credible, and that was her greatest problem. And it was interesting to see how that came apart because there was no other evidence that the defence could lead to actually help her in her exoneration. So I think it wasn't a last-ditch attempt. I think it was their only option aside from just staying silent, saying, "Well, there is no defence. We'll just go to submissions," and saying, "Right." And it was curious. I suppose one of the things about this too, watching a jury, they were out for 5.5 days. And that's quite a long time in our trials. And this is just a curiosity, I was on the Sunday, I think I better go down to Morwell in Victoria where the trial was being held, because 5.5 days in, fair chance are the jury's either going to come back and say, we can't decide, or the judge is going to invite them back and say, how's it going? I can't push you, but how's it all going? It was a really intriguing morning. And when I remember when I got down there, day one of the trial, in the media room, which is full of people like me, we're all thinking, oh, 90%. She's just got to get fast. It'll be all over. 90% guilty, not a problem. By the time we got to 6 days of deliberations, we're sort of sitting around that very morning, saying, oh, Jesus, we know she's done it. It's absolutely compelling we know she's done it. But is it evidence beyond reasonable doubt? So, law, black and white, yeah, but there's a big grey bit. And we're thinking, Jesus Christ, will it be a mistrial? Will she get not beyond, because they can't, we need 12 people to agree. It has to be unanimous. So we're thinking, oh God, wouldn't that be awful for the family, just for everything, the family had to go through this again. We all go off to lunch. Local coffee shop, coppers on one side, lawyers and down the other, and blah, blah, blah. About 1:30, 1:45, phones go bang. You think, oh, shit. I drop my toasted sandwich. There are people who shouldn't be running like me, bolting up the street. There are journalists normally in high heels and that sort of stuff. They're clattering up the street, unseemly rush to the courtroom. 2:15 that afternoon, the jury come back in, and in about 30 seconds, guilty, 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 guilty. Bang. And we thought, whew.
Now, there is also, this is a very good chronology. And there's a couple of things I want to hit here that when I read about the case first, I tried to get in touch with, I'll give the name in a minute. I tried to get in touch with someone that I thought this would be a different way to cover this case until I found was Dr. Chris Webster.
Yeah, and Dr. Chris Webster is a very interesting chap. And it's also for your audience too. It's the difference between what you can say after the trial and what you're constrained to say in the trial. In the trial, Chris Webster, he's this big bloke, big, a bit larger than life. Very plain speaking, I think would be the nice way to put it. Chris is one of the original physicians at the local hospital, and he actually sees Erin in the morning. She says, "Oh, I've been sick all night," and he's thinking, "This is a bit odd." He's immediately thinking, and she comes into the hospital, and he said, "Well, everyone's seriously crook. We need to look after you." "Oh, I want to go away for 90 minutes and look after a few things at home." And he's thinking, "You're nuts." And this is what he's thinking. He gives very clear evidence about his interactions with Erin, which is very professionally observed in the courtroom. Now, and it's compelling evidence about how Erin looked, what she reacted, how she slipped away home for a couple of hours and then came back and blah, blah, blah. And it's his observations of those very early days. Very compelling evidence, delivered with a great degree of dignity and professionalism. That's all good. Jury's come back. Chris Webster, a couple of days after it's all done and dusted, Chris Webster tells his real story. Well, not the real story, that's a bad term. He actually tells what he wasn't able to say in the courtroom. And his view was, and he's quite robust, And I think he said something like, I think she's mad. He's quite colourful in his description. He's interviewing Erin about what she'd eaten and where did you get the mushrooms from? And she said, oh, Woolworths, which is a local supermarket chain here. And he says, at that moment, I knew she'd killed them or something like that. Dramatic moment because you don't buy death caps from Woolworths. And all the pieces fell into place for him. And he then gives an interview to some of the media saying, I knew what had happened when she did that. And I thought, you're mad, blah, 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 blah. Quite the colourful interview, to put it mildly. He's been people complained that he was a bit unprofessional.
She didn't respond in a way that instantly would have explained it as a tragic accident. Yeah, that's it. From that moment, in my mind, she was guilty, she was evil, and very smart to have planned it all and carry it out, but didn't quite dot every I and cross every T.
He's been chastised by one of the medical boards for doing his media stuff. I think good on him. He put a real face to this story. He said what he couldn't say in court because it would have been quite damaging. But he's gone to the public and said, well, this is what really happened. And he's very colourful. I think he does TikTok as well and all sorts of things. But he's really entertaining, and and I think for him, just utterly horrific. And I think one of the points that he alludes to is that had she been up front day one, they may have had a better chance of saving some lives. But her lack of candour was potentially may have killed people. We can't say whether they would have lived or died. But as the point he makes is that early knowledge, they may have just been able to help a bit more than they could, but they had their hands from because they were trying to work out what the hell had happened. Erin had the knowledge, but she didn't share it. And I think that really rankled with a good doctor, smart bloke, knows what he's doing. Just that little bit of, even a couple of hours might have helped. Yeah, Simon hasn't given any interviews. There was a moment in the case where he wanted to give an interview, but it was not a good idea, to put it mildly. He's been very good. The entire family have kept a very dignified silence. There are all rumours running around. Are they going to sell it to media? They're going to do podcasts, whatever. At this point, they've been completely silent. The family have had their say in court. Simon had a victim's impact statement read for him, which was quite lengthy. His sister gave a victim's impact statement in court. She was utterly compelling. And Ian Wilkinson, the survivor, gave a victim's impact statement in the court. And whereupon he said, I forgive Erin Patterson. But it came with conditions. It was extraordinarily dignified. The only outside court comment that's been made so far is that morning after the victim's impact statements, Ian Wilkinson did something I think fantastic. Media, we want a picture and we want a couple of grabs. That's all we want. He stood outside the courtroom, quickly convened a press conference, and he spoke for about 3.5 minutes. And he just thanked the people who'd been involved getting through this terrible ordeal, made a couple of points for the media and said, thank you very much. And that was it. So that was the only public comment. A man of extraordinary dignity and bravery. And it was just quite an incredible moment. And no one pestered him, unusually for the media. They just listened to what he had to say. He nailed it. And that was the only comment made by the family outside. And that was outside the courtroom on the day of sentencing. So, yeah, damned impressive family. For my speculation, I think they wisely decided to not add any more to the fire and just to try and get on rebuilding what they can of their lives and primarily looking after those 2 kids.
So again, give us your web address and all that so people can maybe drop you a line if they want to talk to you. Or
yeah, they can find me on social media on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, or through my publisher Hachette.
There you go. Now, again, I do recommend to my audience that they get the book, and they can get the book wherever books are sold. It's probably in your library as well. I like to buy them. I have a whole shelf here. My wife keeps telling me that I can't buy any more books. So the only thing I do now to soothe her is that I contact the author, and I said, "Will you come on the podcast?" And if they say yes, because I think the story is interesting, then I read the book. Then I get the book. But I don't.
Really?
I can't do it anymore. Buy it. Love the book. Then you contact. Oh, I don't do that. Or then sometimes, unfortunately, I find out they just died. It's so
Inconvenient.
good word. It's inconvenient. Well, listen, this has been great. I was speaking to my wife. She's making dinner. It's 6:00 now here, and I'm going to have my dinner. But this has been great. I'll
Thank you.
make my magic and all that, and I will give you. You're certainly welcome and encouraged to put the links on your website and that kind of stuff, so we get it out there. Maybe I'll get a few more. As I said, I do have some customers, if you will, in Australia, but maybe we can build some more. And I'll come back too. I'll read some of your other books, and I'll come back again. Absolutely. So once again, I want to thank Duncan McNagg for appearing today on Murder Most Foul.
Thank you, Jim.